Her full name is Heidi Elizabeth Vistendal. Honestly, I liked it. I wrote a list of names, and it turns out I like all of the 90s supermodel names, like Heidi Klum, Claudia Schiffer, Elle Macpherson. But Heidi was the one that I liked the most. When I looked up the origin of the name, it comes from the name Adelheid, which is actually where the name Adele comes from. So when I saw that, it kind of solidified it for me. Her middle name is Elizabeth, which is named after her great-grandmother on my father's side. I just really like the name Elizabeth. Yeah, it was really like confronting, I think, is a good word for it. The demand is much higher than the supply, and the process is hard. You have to go on a waiting list at first for 9 months before you get to the top of the list, and once you're at the top of the list, you get access to the list, and it gives you all of the current available donors, and there could be between 3 and 20, and you get to just peruse. So you get access to the donor list for a 3-month period where you get to watch who comes and goes, or the donors that come and go. And you can choose if you want to go with one of the donors. But the thing that I found really challenging was that obviously there are quite a few people who are also monitoring the list. And when a donor came up that sort of ticks your boxes, you know, like Caucasian, I wanted obviously her to look like me. So maybe European or like Caucasian really. And then the donor can actually choose if they want to donate to a single person or not. And they can also choose if they have religious specifications or education, anything. They can choose the specs. And a lot of the time they don't want a single mum. They want 2 parents, a male and a female. And, you know, half the time they're religious. There's a lot of things that, a lot of blocks, like roadblocks in the way. And so when someone does come up, a donor that does come up, that is available for you for donation, that sort of ticks your boxes, you are not the only one who wants it. And as soon as I would find somebody that I thought was appropriate, I would send the details to my family and just say, what do you think, rah, rah, rah. By the time we decided, yep, let's go for it, it was taken. And so you basically have to be really aggressive. And I'm lucky, I can be aggressive, but I also work in a job that's on my feet. So I'm not in front of a computer all day. So I wasn't the first to see the new donors uploaded. So I was at a disadvantage in that sense. And so I rang them and told them off. and they actually were really helpful, and they did their work for me. They found somebody appropriate for me, and I went about it that way. But I think if you were not aggressive, you might have a real struggle. Like it was challenging. It was a challenging thing. So my donor comes from overseas, comes from America. So the other thing that I found really interesting is that different states have different laws for how many families you can have. In Canberra, you can donate, and your donation can be used for 10 different families. So that means that you can have 10 separate children running around to separate families in that one state. New South Wales, it's only 5, which the risk that they've found with donating, so multiple donations and multiple children, is that if 2 children ever, or 2 siblings ever come into contact or ever meet each other, they tend to have a connection, and the likelihood of them pairing up or getting together is really high if they happen to meet. So it's, which, has its own problems associated. So I wanted to go with the most minimal risk. So my donor is an American, so it's an American donor. We didn't pay that much more. You can actually pay a premium price to get a premium donor, which I found really unethical, but I guess that's the way the world is. But yeah, we didn't pay too much more to get the donations from overseas. Really, it was more like shipping. So I was, more settled with the idea of having a donor from a different country, because the likelihood of her running into a sibling is so much lower. So we got our donor eventually through IVF Australia. They're the ones who have the most solid relationships with donor banks, because IVF Australia have been around for the longest, I think. So they were the easiest ones to go through. Once we got the donor and we settled on them, then you go down the road of how you're going to do this. To get Medicare, so to get rebates for IVF, you need to have fertility problems. And so I didn't have any known fertility problems, so you have to try with artificial insemination first. So we tried that twice and it didn't work. And then we did 2 IVF egg collections. The first collection, I ended up with no pregnancies. In the second collection, I ended up with 1 miscarriage, 1 that didn't work, and this one. She was the last one. The lucky last. The other thing that I did with my... I had particular things that I wanted. Like, I wanted the opportunity to have a girl. And I know that the father is, or the donor, actually that's something I'll say. The language that we use with Heidi around this situation is that she has a donor. She doesn't have a father. There's no parental figure involved with regards to how she came about. It's simply a donor. And so I have to catch myself if I ever use the word father and not, and rephrase it, because it's a donor. I had a lot of things that I wanted with regards to her donor. So I wanted to know that he had sisters, because that increases the chance of me having a girl. So he had 2 sisters, her donor. He has an Italian background. So he's American with his mum's an Italian background and his dad's Scottish or Irish, I think. He's 6'4", so he's tall. I know. One of my highest priorities was that he could get a tan skin type. I just wanted her to be able to go in the sun. Like, it's something that I missed out on. Like, I can't go in the sun without getting burnt. And it is what it is, but I would love to be able to just lie in the sun and not be at risk of cancer. So hopefully she will end up with that kind of skin type. He has blue eyes in the family, which means that she has the possibility of getting blue eyes. Because my family are all quite intelligent, we all come from, highly intelligent background. I wasn't worried about that. Some women are really all about high levels of intelligence. To me, I was more looking for the opposite. Not necessarily the opposite, but like more practical. Maybe like someone who works with their hands or whatever it is. Anyway, the donor ended up being a software developer, which is fine. His family were all quite intelligent as well, but sort of similar to my family, like not sort of standard. Like he had a sister who was a teacher and another sister who was a stenographer or something. So just, educated, but not, what do they call those people that have Mensa, like high level IQ? It's kind of the donor story, I think. Straight away. Straight away. You just, yeah. There's, I'll just talk about the donor. No, we have guidance around it. They're quite stern. That truth is so important, and that you teach them from the very beginning that families nowadays are diverse and it's fine. You don't view it as a problem. There are some children's books, not many, so ideas, yeah. But there's some children's books written specifically around my situation. So I've got one, I think the author is French, coming from France, which is specific to her and my situation. So I think that's how we go about it. Like, start from the beginning, just explaining why and what. And I think one of my friends said, just say to her, I had so much love to give, I couldn't live without you. I want to do so much. And I think that she'll be fine. She'll understand. The thing that I do worry about, especially as a physiotherapist, is the male influence. The male influence in physiotherapy or in physical development of a child is that they are much higher risk takers. A male will throw a child around, they will push a child into the pool and make them swim, they will put them on the skateboard and say it's fine, whereas a female usually won't do those things with her child, and they are crucial to a child's physical development, their vestibular development, their neurological development of knowing which way is up, which way is down, and coordination, all those things. So that I've got in the back of my mind things like that, like how am I going to make sure she doesn't miss out on those things. So just hand her over to my wildest friends. But yeah, that's really the only part that I've ever worried about. So she's a really chill baby. And I think that was because in pregnancy I was so chill. Like, motherhood is something I knew, I don't know, I always thought I would be a mother. It never crossed my mind that I wouldn't. And as I got older and I couldn't find someone, or things just didn't work out the way that they should, I started to worry, because in my head I just was meant to be a mother. And so when I was finally pregnant, it just was like things going as they should be. So I never had any anxiety around the pregnancy. I never had any anxiety around the labor. Right at the very end, I educated myself a little bit more than what I possibly, I don't know if I regret, I made sure I was really educated about everything that was going to go on. And I wonder if I should have been a bit more ignorant, because I only started to get a little bit anxious right at the end when I had all this information. But I still didn't really. I just kind of went into it like, the baby's going to come out, like it or lump it. When we got there, so I had to be induced. If your child is the product of IVF, they induce you. Something to do with the frozen embryo not necessarily being dated correctly or something like that. I don't know. But the longer that the fetus is in the womb, past 40 weeks, the exponential increase in risk that you carry. So they induce you. That was probably what made it so much harder, the labor. Because when you go into natural labor, your oxytocin comes in waves, in surges. And so when you get an increase in oxytocin, you have a contraction. But then the oxytocin diminishes and you get a break. When you're induced, you are, they put a drip into your arm with syntocin, which is the synthetic form of oxytocin, that drip is continuous. So you go straight into contractions, 1 minute on, 1 minute off, and it does not change. So you do not get a break. And that, I have the utmost respect for women that go through induction without an epidural, because it is incredibly hard. It's the worst pain I've ever experienced in my entire life. Again, you just do it. I was given the option for epidural and I took it, and that was the best decision I ever made. I'm going to be really crass. I was vomiting, I was pissing myself, I was in so much pain, my entire body was convulsing. And when I had the epidural, I laid down on the bed and basically went to sleep while my body continued to contract. So, thank God for modern science. But yeah, anyone that gets induced, like my sister got induced and had to go through it without an epidural, and I just have this level of respect because it is incredibly painful. When I was due to start pushing, I had this idea in my head that I wanted an upright birth because I wanted gravity to help. But Heidi was in distress. Her heartbeat had gone above 100, or above whatever it is for a baby, 160. She was tachycardic for too long, and they needed to get her out. So the OBGYN came in, and instead of upright, I was placed on my back so that she could use a ventouse, it's a vacuum that pulls her out. But she didn't actually have to pull her out because she said I was able to push adequately to get her out, but we had to do it quick. The maximum amount of time you push for in labor is 2 hours before they will take action. But I had her out within 40 minutes or half an hour even, and she was febrile. She had a fever when she came out. So the scariest part of labor for me was that the pediatrician had to come and make sure she was okay. That was the scariest part of labor for me. While she was being cared for by the pediatrician, I was hemorrhaging and I didn't even know. I had a 1.5 litre blood loss, hemorrhage, and didn't even blink because I was so worried about her. So my labor experience actually was nowhere near as bad as what actually happened. My personal experience was a really good one. Other than her having a fever. And once she came out and they settled her down, her fever broke on its own. She didn't need antibiotics or anything, and she was fine after that. The labor itself, to me, wasn't the hardest part of delivery. The hardest part for me of delivery is feeding her. Feeding her has been incredibly challenging. Because I worked in pre and postnatal for a while, and women would always tell me stories about how hard it was. You don't have any idea until it is you who's experiencing it. And to be unable to feed your child is instinctually really hard to accept, because you are supposed to be able to do this thing that is supposed to be natural. And if you can't, something's wrong with you. It's kind of this deep belief system, I guess. So to me, the hardest part was feeding. Once we added the formula to her feeding and got it to the adequate supply, she's been really good. But we had numerous tears together, nights where we weren't sleeping at all because she was hungry and I didn't even know. And yeah, it was a really hard experience. She was jaundiced because she was not, she didn't have enough milk, so she wasn't processing the bilirubin, which is the byproduct of breakdown of red blood cells in her blood. So she wasn't processing, her liver is obviously immature and it wasn't able to process the bilirubin, so she was jaundice, which made her lethargic. So she was sleeping, and I thought, oh my God, I've got a really lovely sleeping baby. I had no idea that the fact that she was sleeping for so long was actually really dangerous. So yeah, the hardest part of labor for me was after it, when she was out. She'll hate this, what you're told. Yes, you will. What would I want her to know? You're like the best thing that has ever happened in my life. Like, you would never know how. People say it, they say you don't know a mother's love until you become one. And yeah, it's absolutely true. Like, best thing that could have ever happened to me. Yeah, the experience of pregnancy for me was horrible, but it didn't matter. And the experience of labor for me was actually not that bad, but if you look at it objectively, it was really hard, and it just didn't matter. None of it matters. The hardest part was worrying that you weren't going to be okay, but you were. Yes, you were. Yeah. She's a good baby, like a really good baby. Once we figured out that she was hungry, she's perfect. Yeah.